time for Embrace Race, time for Talking Race and Kids, which is our monthly webinar program. I'm Melissa. I am not Melissa. I'm Andrew.
He so wishes.
This is Melissa. We are the co-founders of Embrace Race. You're seeing Christian and Nora, whom we'll introduce properly in just a second, are fantastic guests. We are very happy to have them, very happy to have you, and very happy to be having this conversation, which is called Breaking Hate, Supporting Children to Push Back Against White Nationalism, which of course is unfortunately a very, very big issue, and a very big issue in a lot of communities. In part, of course, because it's an issue, many of us would say it's been embraced at some of the highest levels in this country. And a lot of parents and grandparents and teachers and other caregivers are trying to figure out what they can do to be alert to and then to help kids push back, not only the kids who are being recruited themselves, possibly, but their friends, right? Other people are going to be, other children are going to be in the mix. So we're really glad to have you here. Just a couple housekeeping details, as they say. You'll notice at the bottom of the screen, we have a Q&A box and we have a chat box. We are going to talk with Nora and Christian for about 20 minutes, cover some basic ground, 25 minutes max. Then we're going to open it up to your questions. Feel free to put those questions as they occur to you, even from the beginning, into the Q&A box, preferably. We will be pulling questions from there over the last 25 minutes or so of the program. Kristen and Nora will be happy to field those questions. If you have information of yourselves, right? Our audiences are always have lots of good information to share, not only with us and with the panelists, but with each other. So feel free to put that into the chat send your messages that are appropriate for everybody to all panelists and attendees, not just to the panelists themselves. Thank you for putting in all this information. I'm seeing North Adams, Massachusetts, Montclair, New Jersey, Kansas City, Silver Spring, Maryland, Ashland, et cetera, et cetera. We have lots of folks from all over the place, Atlanta, Georgia. Really happy to have this national audience. Really, really happy to have you guys, Christian and Nora, who've invested tons of time and work and energy and all of that heart into this work. Let me turn it over to Melissa to introduce them and get us going.
I'm so excited about this conversation. So breaking hate, supporting children to push back against white nationalism. So we're hearing a lot about white nationalism in the news, even sort of closer to home in our communities, things happening. And that means our kids are too. And when we see sort of these big incidents, it means there's a lot more that's going on that we're not seeing, right? So we're really excited to have Nora Flanagan and Christian. Christian, please pronounce your last name for me.
Picciolini, like a peach. Like a peach.
Like peach.
Like peach. Picciolini. I wanted it to be more romantic the way you said it, but I like both ways. I like both ways. We're very excited to have them on. It's pretty clear to us that there's, and you're noting this also if you're kind of reading about kids in white nationalism, that they're being recruited younger and younger, and the recruitment is more and more stealth. And that means oftentimes it doesn't look like, it's not obvious to parents, it's not obvious to teachers, it's not obvious to people who work with kids. So that's why we've got these folks on to help us in this back to school time in figuring out what the staircase is, to what sort of the stuff that's less obvious leading to more obvious looks like. So I'm very happy to have them here, and I'm going to introduce Nora Flanagan, who is a high school teacher in Chicago, which is where we met, Chicago.
We love Chicago.
They're both in Chicago, by the way. And she has researched and organized against racism for decades. Her efforts have included speaking to law enforcement and other government agencies, school administrations, community groups, and media outlets about the intersection of bigotry and youth culture. She recently authored, and you might have seen this co-authored, Confronting White Nationalism in Schools, a toolkit designed to help schools thoughtfully and effectively respond to incidents of racial hostility and proactively strengthen school communities, put out by the Western State Center. That's great. And then Christian has his bio, the first line of his bio is like one of the favorite first lines of any bio. Like ever. Christian Picciolini is an award-winning television producer, a public speaker, author, peace advocate, and a former violent extremist. Love it. That's writing there. He also is. After leaving the hate movement, he helped create during his youth in the 1980s and 90s. He began the painstaking process of making amends and rebuilding his life. And Christian's done so much. You've probably read in, we sent out sort of a bio of him, and you might have seen it in registration, kind of an extensive bio, amazing stuff. And he's also written a book, White American Youth, about his time in the white supremacist skinhead movement and his disengagement from it. He now leads the Free Radicals Project, which is a global, that's right, this is happening everywhere, a global extremism prevention and disengagement network. So very, very glad to have you guys. Welcome, both of you in Chicago.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew and Melissa.
So we want to start with just, basic question about how you got into this work, and I've alluded to some of how you got into it in your bios, but if you could each take a turn at telling us a bit about you.
Yeah, Christian, you should probably start.
I was going to say, Nora, you've been doing this much longer than me. You should have started, but I'd be happy to go first. And I just want to acknowledge it's a huge privilege to be here. Knowing that there are a lot of people who are not getting the same second chance that I got, that don't look like me. So it's always a privilege to be able to, to speak to people about my story, but to try and raise their voices while I do that as well. I was 14 years old in 1987 when I was recruited into America's first neo-Nazi skinhead group. I spent 8 years in that movement, became a leader of it until I got out at 23 years old. But it's my story is a typical story, but it's also the story that most people don't think of. I came from a pretty normal home, and that is pretty standard with people who join these types of movements. My parents are Italian immigrants who came to the US in the mid-60s. And they were the victims of prejudice, so it wasn't part of my family foundation to be racist. But I was looking for three very important things that I think every young person was looking for: a sense of identity, a community, and a sense of purpose. And I found it in an alley in 1987 as a lonely, kind of marginalized kid looking for a family. And the rest was history. I've been, for the last 20 years, I've been out for 23, but for the last 20, I've been doing the work of helping people disengage from hate groups and from extremist movements, everything from neo-Nazis to white nationalists to former ISIS members. And I also teach my process of disengagement at all different levels, from high school to college to military and law enforcement as well.
So this can be where I come in. Where to start? So if you read Christian's book, and you should, and that's part of our resources for this webcast, he talks about how he immediately started recruiting more people and trying to be as visible as possible. And what probably most people watching don't know is that Christian and I grew up about a mile and a half away from each other on the south side of Chicago. So when Christian was out recruiting and tagging and, getting as many people on his team as possible, I was seeing it as like a 13, 14-year-old kid wondering what the hell was going on in my neighborhood. And it was really upsetting because I was not only not raised to be racist, I was raised to stand up to bullies. And all of a sudden there was like a very bullying climate in my neighborhood. So I kind of grouped up with the other punks who were really worried about this. And that's how I became part of the anti-racist movement. And Christian and I didn't meet. When did we meet, friend? Like 10, 12 years ago? I mean, he had been out for years and years. And he actually approached me when he was getting ready to publish his book. I mean, he had written a draft and he wanted help from somebody who would know the story. And also, it doesn't hurt that I'm an English teacher and I know about commas and stuff. So he asked for my help. And if anybody watching right now is like, why does he get a second chance? Why, you don't get to be the hero of the story if you were a Nazi? That's exactly what I thought when he asked for my help. And I was incredibly resistant to work with him, to even meet him, to speak to him. But the fact that we've been working together and collaborating and genuinely friends for the past more than a decade, sometimes it's worth it to give somebody a second chance, because we've been able to do some great work together. So that was how I started. But throughout, friend, I appreciate you. Throughout my career, since I knew about this stuff, I was kind of informally the teacher on the faculty that could spot when a kid was going that way, and would really awkwardly approach my administrators and be like, hey guys, we got to talk to this kid. And they'd be like, how do you know? And I'd be like, I don't know. Like, it was a really awkward conversation with my boss. But I would try to stay quiet about it and just kind of play it low that I knew this stuff. And then over the last few years, it's time not to be quiet anymore. So I've been doing more visible work and publishing. So I hope that covers it in a few minutes or less.
In a few minutes or less,
Well
but
done.
there's certainly, there's obviously a lot more to dig in there about your own personal stories, right? So certainly I'm fascinated by the, Kristen, you say, and you already said it, it's counter stereotypic, as they say, that you would grow up in, essentially a normal family, one where it doesn't sound like, there are sort of all kinds of racist ideas and ideology being openly promoted. You said you're looking for purpose, you're looking, for community and so on. And then Nora, that you were at 13, 14, that you were identifying, right, and identifying with other kids who wanted to push back. I mean, that sounds extraordinary. Before we even get into that a bit more, I wonder if we can get some basic terms down, right? Kristen, you referred to sort of these types of groups, and we hear a lot of terminology that I imagine many of us, who aren't nearly as sort of learned as you two on these issues don't understand the distinctions or whether they matter. So I'm talking about, right, white supremacist groups, white power groups, white nationalist groups, not to mention neo-Nazi and more recently alt-right. So can you give us just, a quick primer on what do we need to understand about distinctions, if any, among these terms and what they refer to?
I think like anything else in the world, it's complicated. There is no simple answer, and there is no black and white solution for it. I think ultimately, if I were to classify it, because terms like white nationalist and alt-right are relatively new terms, is I would say that there is a large white supremacist umbrella, that there are many different nuanced subcultures that fall under that in some way, are aligned with kind of that umbrella term. Certainly if you're a neo-Nazi, that's a little bit different than being, somebody who's in the alt-right. While, one, it's based on political beliefs, but ultimately they're kind of looking for the same goal, whether it's trying to fight for a white race that they believe is being replaced or is dying, or to save a homeland that they believe is being taken away. And I think all of those groups ultimately will agree to that at some point. But there are nuances. Certainly Nazis believe something different than the Klan versus a fundamentalist Christian militant group or things like that. But that's the thread, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Nora, do you
have I've found that over the years, I mean, there's a new name every few years, but and a new outfit and some new logos, but it's the same stuff. And I mean, organizations have kind of mapped the lineage from those same neo-Nazi groups of the late 80s and early 90s, right down to the modern anti-immigrant groups like Turning Point. I mean, we're not reinventing the wheel. That wheel has been rolling for decades.
Right. And in many cases too, I would say that terms like white nationalist and alt-right are their marketing terms. It's they sat if you can imagine them sitting in a boardroom trying to come up with names to make them seem less racist. in order to attract more people. You know, that would be an example of alt-right, which is a manufactured term. So Nora is absolutely correct. It moves really, really quickly. They have to, because none of their ideologies make much logical sense. So they have to keep moving. They have to keep shape-shifting and metastasizing. And now, unfortunately, they're, you know, really with the internet, able to reach, you know, our young people much easier than, for instance, when I was 14 years old.
Right, right. That's something we should get into, just how it's different. Christian, I just want to understand a little bit more when you say, because I think a lot of, you know, as I said in introing you, that a lot of people kind of don't think that their kids are vulnerable. And I imagine your parents didn't imagine it. What are sort of some of the elements that you said you were, you know, you were looking for family and you had a family. So what do you mean when you say you were looking for family?
Yeah, so in my situation, my parents are Italian immigrants who came over in the mid-60s, and they had to work 7 days a week, 16 hours a day to survive. They were trying to run a small business, so I didn't see them very often. They were good parents. They loved me. You know, they were kind. They didn't have vices. They didn't raise me to be a racist, but they weren't there. And as a young person, you know, I often asked myself, what did I do to push them away, without knowing how to really communicate, you know, my confusion or anything like that. So I became really detached. And I think, you know, certainly having the benefit of looking back now and having my own children, I think I was really trying to get their attention, you know, because I've really felt invisible, not just with my family that wasn't there, but also in the community that I lived in, because my parents moved into a community on the southwest side of Chicago with other families from the same villages in Italy that they came from. So it was like this insulated community where everybody kept together. So I felt like an outsider even in America growing up. You know, people made fun of my name. I was, you know, my parents took me to a suburb to take me to a, you know, a private Catholic school where I was suddenly the outsider and I didn't fit in. So I think part of, you know, people ask all the time, like, what do we look for? Well, one, it's not always the, you know, the very evident warning signs of, you know, shaving your head and getting tattoos. It's the same things that we would look for, you know, for drugs or for gangs. You know, are they feeling isolated and, you know, detached? Are they not building connection with people in the real world? Are they depressed? Are they saying things that are out of character? You know, I mean, all the things that we're taught as parents and teachers to look for are the same things that I would say look for that in your children, because it just really matters what intercepts them. Suicide is an extremist behavior. Crime is an extremist behavior. Drug addiction is an extremist behavior. So is being a Nazi or, you know, joining ISIS. It's really about what intercepts you to manifest that, which gives you some feeling of agency. You know, our radicalization starts the day we're born. It doesn't start when we, you know, grab an ideology. That's just the final component. That gives us the license of who to blame for our anger or self-hatred or, you know, our grievances, whatever. So we, you know, people ask me all the time, like, are you talking to people who are, you know, too young? I said, no, I was 14 and it started much younger for me. It doesn't just start when they, you know, start denying the Holocaust. It starts much, much earlier.
So Christian, so what I hear you saying is, yeah, there's this, right, there are these needs, right? So you talk about sort of alienation, disaffection,
Loneliness.
Yeah, loneliness, isolation.
Trauma.
Those
Emotional trauma, physical trauma, or psychological trauma. That's what it boils down to. I call them potholes. You know, the things that appear in our journey of life that detour us, that if we aren't careful, if we don't have good navigation or a support system or tow trucks to come pick us up when we're in trouble, sometimes we get detoured to the fringes, and there are people waiting with a narrative that will empower you falsely. And it doesn't matter today if you're 10 or, you know, 70. The internet changed things. I had to be standing in an alley. Somebody had to approach me, hand me a flyer, invite me to a meeting. If you're feeling disaffected today, you're probably living your world online or in video games and things like that. So unfortunately, they've gotten smart. Recruiters have gotten smart to look in those places. Places like, multiplayer online games, if our kids are playing with headsets. I had a mother just last week send me 800 accounts that she looked up in the game Roblox, which is a children's kind of a game, Lego kind of building game, that were white nationalist accounts that were on there just creating profiles to recruit people. So that unfortunately is the new reality now that we open this frontier.
So let's come back. Let's come back for sure to the whole issue of recruitment. Nora, I wanted to go to you though, and for this sort of the flip side question. Again, remarkable, right? That as a 13, 14-year-old, you were seeing this stuff and saying, I don't want this in my community. And you're telling your teachers, wait, you may need to, have a conversation with this kid. So I'm thinking about, yes, middle school and the power of influencers, right? For better or worse, in these kids, also 13, 14, 16 years old, who are might be positive influencers. And of course, or I suppose, of course, it would be nice to be able to support children who have that impulse, right? That inclination. Is there anything you can tell us, whether from your own background or in your work now, maybe drawn from the toolkit? How can we support kids who want to play that role in pushing back against this stuff?
I think step one is your kids have to be comfortable coming to you with something that might make you really angry. One of the things that we added to the tip sheet for tonight's webcast is when you're talking to your kids about this, stay calm. Because when my older son was in 5th grade, he started seeing racist graffiti on the bathroom wall at his school. And we do the math, I think he was 10 at the time. And I really had to check my anger level because I wanted to just absolutely blow up at just how awful that was. But if I did that, he was never going to come and tell me anything again. And I mean, anytime we want to be there to support our children through anything difficult, they've got to see us stay calm while they explain it to us. So that would be thing number one, and ask lots of questions and get clarity. So as far as we talk a lot about how to raise an upstander and someone who will speak up. You need to teach them those skills too. I mean, I had to teach my sons to not be scared to go tell a teacher or administrator something, or how to talk to their friends about stuff, because I don't know why, but we assume kids know how to have these conversations. Kids only know how to have the conversations that we model for them and coach them in having. So talking and talking and talking is huge. Beyond that, I only found out about that bathroom incident because I randomly asked. I said, are you seeing anything weird at school? Because I was hearing it from educator friends. And my son was like, actually. And then I wonder, what if I hadn't asked? So ask, and you'd be amazed what they're seeing and hearing. We had incidents here in Chicago grade schools of anti-Semitism in the game Clash of Clans 5 years ago. So we were already seeing it in online gaming platforms aimed at elementary school kids. These aren't the games that high school kids are playing. These are the games that 4th and 5th graders are playing on their first devices that they get. So looking and listening and talking, that's got to come first.
That's such good advice and so hard. I just am thinking of the times when I blew it in terms of, staying calm when they're telling you something hard. So that's really important. And the question thing always in parenting, you just ask a question. What do they think? It's hard, right? Yeah. So Nora, what I hear also, Andrew was asking about what made you sort of the upstander, is I'm guessing that you wouldn't say, except in jest, that you're just a better person than Christian?
No, I just have a really big mouth.
Really? Really?
I'm so bad at keeping my mouth shut. Yep.
So you would sort of tell folks, this is happening. But I'm talking about when you're younger and you're growing. So I'm imagining Christians growing up not being able to talk, not having a place, not having the attention because his parents don't have to work so much. And you somehow aren't having that experience, maybe because you're good at getting the attention or at talking.
So I grew up with 2 brothers in a big loud family in an Irish American community where the nuns would tell us to just take our fights across the street from school. Like, so, I mean, I grew up being comfortable with conflict. I'm not afraid of uncomfortable conversations, and I'm not afraid of confronting folks about stuff. And sometimes that gets me into a lot of trouble. But I mean, that's what I credit to, I don't know, speaking up at a young age and speaking up through adulthood, is because that's what I grew up doing.
That's what you saw. Yeah, that was a good example. Yeah.
Well, let me just say this, you know, had somebody approached me before America's first neo-Nazi skinhead did in an alley at 14 years old, somebody from Nora's side, I would have gone that way. You know, had a baseball coach approached me in that alley, I would have played baseball. Had, you know, a joke, had a ballerina troupe been across the street, I could have been the greatest dancer on earth. You don't want to see me dance, trust me. But it's true. I mean, I honestly, young people want to be seen. They are smart. They want agency just like we do as human beings. And I think that we're making mistakes by not amplifying their passions. Instead of, I mean, let's face it, they live in a kind of a dictatorship until then they leave the house, right? It's our rules as parents. They have to, you know, be in at a certain time, you know, follow certain standards, whatever. And I think to play on, you know, to riff on what Nora said, if we can learn to be cautiously vulnerable with our children and, you know, explain to them we're not perfect and tell them why, then maybe we can expect the same from them. But if we don't ever tell them that, you know, because they think we're perfect, they're always trying to live up or be better than us. And you know, we're all dealing with something that nobody knows about, every single person. And I think maybe it's time that we start having those more vulnerable conversations with the people that we love, you know, with less repercussion, so that we can expect them to come to us when they really have those questions or that confusion.
Yeah, that is so true.
So
deep.
let me ask, you know, some really sort of big question. That's about what the two of you, you know, are seeing now, right? So on one hand, clearly this white nationalism question is a very big one. It really does affect a lot of kids and all of that stuff. We know about the explosion of hate groups over the last few years, all of it, right? And my question, I guess, is why is that happening and where is this headed? So one issue, you know, Christian, you especially mentioned the internet, right? That the internet has really changed things in terms of recruitment. And yet some of the fundamental things, maybe those have changed too, but some of the fundamental things you point to, again, alienation, disaffection, right? Kids looking for meaning who might get it from any number of places. And unfortunately, too many of them are getting it from, right, white supremacists, you know, hate, organized hate. But can you help us wrap our minds around why is this? Of course, you know, there's the White House and the administration and folks who have been invited into the administration. But can you give us, what's your take on why is this such a huge deal right now?
In terms of numbers and
in terms of numbers and right, and what's your sense for where this is going?
There's really one word I think to sum it up is uncertainty. I think when, you know, environments are uncertain, that extremist narratives thrive. You know, that's just been true throughout history. And, you know, we have a lot of adults on right now. I would ask, how many of you are certain about the world we live in right now, no matter what side you happen to be on? We are uncertain. And if we are uncertain as adults, imagine what our young people must feel like, you know, when normally they're supposed to, you know, rely on us for our guidance and for our, you know, being adults. And I think that, you know, maybe we're not doing such a good job of that right now. And, you know, I think I don't want to make people afraid. You know, this isn't an infection that is going to, you know, kill our body. But it is something I think that we need to keep an eye on, because while the internet is an amazing place to learn and to connect and to be exposed to new things, it's also, you know, kind of the new frontier for us. It's a baby. And it's also being used for really, you know, not so great things too. So I saw somebody ask, you know, like, where, you know, are these people looking? Where are they recruiting? And it's really where they know vulnerable people congregate. You know, they're going to, you know, video sites where they know young people are watching a lot of videos more than they're watching television, for sure. They're going to, you know, funny video sites. They're going to, you know, depression forums. They're going to gaming forums, because you know, they can bet that if you're spending a lot of time there, you probably don't have those connections in real life, that you might be looking for something. It's really no different than, you know, how I used to go to a video arcade to recruit kids who were hanging out there all day. Well, now it's online gaming. You know, it's the kids who are playing online games. And it's not the games, let me just be clear. It's not the content, it's the, you know, the folks they're talking to. So, you know, we really have to just adapt that, you know, there are more vulnerable people in a place where it's easy to connect with them now. The digital alley, I guess, you know, as opposed to my physical alley.
I want to add too, from the school perspective. So I teach high school, and I live in Chicago, which is one of the most infamously segregated cities anywhere. So when students make that jump from grade school to high school in Chicago, often they're experiencing a level of diversity they have not previously encountered. This also happens in the suburbs when they make it to middle school and then again to high school, because they're entering a larger geographic feeder area. So there's that uncertainty and that vulnerability kind of at educational milestones. And we see students, like we've mentioned a couple times, from really progressive homes who've been raised to appreciate diversity. We should talk in a second about the difference between telling your kids to appreciate diversity and modeling that for them and really actually doing it. Because those kids get to high school and they feel unsteady, socially unsteady. Not everyone in the room looks like them. They've been hearing about Muslims, but now there are Muslims in their classes. And, you know, if you watch the news, maybe your impressions of people of other races aren't the best. So you're now negotiating this new kind of demographic in your education setting. And that unsteadiness makes a kid vulnerable. A kid who otherwise, you know, like Christian was describing earlier, has a great home and everything provided for them. But all of a sudden, these messages about alienation and about, you know, not mattering as much, and they're trying to get rid of us, all of a sudden they resonate, and you wouldn't expect it, but they resonate with all kinds of kids.
And sometimes it's as simple as who pays attention to them first.
Right. It certainly does have, it feels like it does have implications, a lot of implications for how we do lots of things, but including school, how we do school, you know, which can be such a lonely, and as Christian said, sort of a prison for lots of folks, right? Just there's a dictator, a lot of rules, and how to get in touch with your passion and feel like you probably did, Christian. I mean, you showed tremendous leadership skills, right? As a young neo-Nazi leading a movement out of your neighborhood. So how do you, and now you're using those same skills, you know, to fight that. So that's,
I am.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm still looking for vulnerable young people, but I'm trying to show them the right path now, as opposed to, you know, leading them down a kind of a path of destruction before. But I just think, you know, had I at 14 years old, I mean, I would have used those same skills and developed those same skills in a positive way had I had that sort of guidance. And I didn't, you know, but there are millions of kids who feel lonely and abandoned and don't become, you know, extremists. And, you know, and in certain cases, it's because they have support systems, or, you know, they have something that can help them navigate those roads. And sometimes it is about privilege and skipping over them. But also, I should say, privilege can be a pothole as well. You know, if it keeps you so isolated that it keeps you from understanding the world around you. You know, people say, well, how can that person who's got a degree and, you know, seems well off and well spoken, how can they be a racist? I thought it was just about, you know, like, you know, the typical kind of dumb, you know, skinhead kind of thug, you know, person, and it's not. People like that can develop potholes too. They can have the emotional trauma. They can be, you know, lashing out for their grievances in other ways. And that is in no way painting, you know, a pity party for them. Just, you know, to help people understand, nobody is born a racist. Even somebody as awful as, you know, somebody who commits an act of racist violence at some point in their life was playing with trucks and matchbox cars and coloring books and things like that. There was a shift. And if we can just make sure that we are with young people all the way, so we can see those shifts before they are supposed to happen, I think that we have a shot.
Can I add one thing to that too that hasn't come up yet, but really should be coming up in every conversation, is that another early indicator is misogyny. In so many of the recent tragedies where someone invoked white nationalism, there was a long history of misogyny. There was a long history of hating women before they hated everybody. And we talk about that in the toolkit. Sorry, somebody asked in the chat. I'm going to watch this. I got a prop. What? That's the toolkit that I co-authored with 2 other women through the Western State Center. And one of the things we realized we had to include was a subsection about misogyny and the role that that's playing more and more, and how that's a point of entry. I mean, I'm raising 2 sons, and we do, yeah, nice. We do live in a culture that as soon as boys are hitting that insecure puberty time, there's somebody there to blame girls. And we joke, we so destructively joke about, you know, bothering the girls you like and all that terrible stuff that we grew up with. But, you know, they're still finding their way to blaming girls for how uncomfortable they feel and like how something's not going right for them. And it is morphing into really dangerous misogyny. So that's something we got to cover.
So this is, there talk about things to cover. There's a lot to cover. We have questions from the folks who registered. We have some questions coming in from this live audience. Let me ask one of those, which is, in fact, I'm going to combine sort of 2 questions, right? So one is about being an upstander, an effective upstander in the digital world, right? How do we do that? And the second question is about how we get our public schools to do some of this media literacy, right? How do we get them to understand the story that you're telling? So the person goes on, our elementary principal cut 20 minutes each week from each class, library, art, music, and PE, to create a new 40-minute weekly class, technology. How do we get schools, right, to recognize this threat and to have, right, mount an institutional response to it?
I'm going to go ahead and unleash the fury and start by saying every school needs a librarian. And so many schools don't have librarians now. In Chicago, we are fighting hard for them because we've lost a lot of them. That's a big part of the fight that the teachers in Chicago are launching, like literally today, is we want librarians because they teach media literacy and they teach our kids to vet sources and they teach our kids how to navigate the internet, and they are disappearing from schools, and that is nothing short of tragic and dangerous. So that's where you start, is, you know, you have the people there who are capable of doing that. It's great that a principal pulled time, or it's great that, you know, like as an English teacher, I cover that in some of my classes, but every school needs someone who is qualified and tasked with doing that. So that's a start. Schools adopted anti-bullying programs, but a lot of them were pretty surface. A lot of them were just, all right, we're dotting that I, we're crossing that T, but we're not actually listening to what's going on in our school community. So one of the things I always say is listen to the students, because by the time one adult in the building knows what's going on, every kid already does. So start by listening to the kids. Sorry, long day of teaching the youth. That's my starter points for building that literacy is the qualified folk and listening to the students. We advise in the toolkit to form a student voice committee or a culture and climate team, or both, to have those conversations before something happens, to strengthen your community and communicate those values and make sure everybody knows where everybody stands before a problem comes up. Like, be proactive about it.
And this is sort of stuff that, we talk about all the time in different contexts when talking about sort of being in creating inclusive communities, right? Like, just be explicit, be on the ball, ask them, right? So we have a question from someone who says, and doesn't give a ton of identifying information, but says, as a marginalized student, I've talked to teachers about things as small as microaggressions and as big as outright neo-Nazi behavior. I'm worried they're starting to think I'm too sensitive. Am I overthinking it? How do I tell the difference between a warning sign and a different political view? at what point do I talk to adults about it?
That's a
Yeah, no,
really great question.
yeah.
Great.
I would say I would actually be worried about the opposite, that administration may be normalizing it, and to never be afraid if it evokes an emotion in you, especially fear, that you should never be afraid to speak up about it, especially in a safe place like a school. And as teachers or administrators or adults, we should never turn you away for that. Because Nora's right. You know, if when it gets to us, young people already know, they're already masters at it. You know, we're just late to the game. So, you know, by the time they come to us, there may already be a lot going on. So I think that as adults, it's our responsibility to listen, to hear, not just listen, but to hear, and to actually, you know, to do something, at least to make that student feel comfortable and safe.
Here's another one. Thank you for that. Someone says that she's hearing that white males at our school are feeling targeted every time social justice is talked about at school. Parents are worried that their boys are so resentful of social justice education efforts that they're more open to white nationalists. There are lots of outreach and opportunities for our boys, but they're still heading in this direction. So this sort of idea of essentially alienated white men and boys in particular, because some say, yeah, they're sort of marginalized within social justice conversation. What's your thinking?
That we shouldn't equate bad white men with white men. You know, I don't think that a young white male you know, who's 12 years old should feel alienated because of who he is or how he was born. And that just like when we talk, you know, when, you know, we raise our voices against law enforcement for doing something bad, we're not speaking out against all cops. We're not speaking out against all white males. We're just speaking out against the ones who are the rapists, who are the, you know, the murderers, the ones who are hurting other people. And we shouldn't equivocate that. And I think it's a slippery slope if we do go over the top, that we will, you know, alienate, you know, well-intentioned people who may find the only support that they get is from the very people that we're trying to keep them from. Because, you know, I tell you, as a recruiter, that's something that we paid attention to. Who was getting marginalized? We would surround them with brotherhood. We would surround them, and that's how we would recruit them. And whether they believed us or not, they would eventually, because we gave them more than anybody else did. So, you know, we have to be careful as a society not to generalize anything. Nothing is black and white. So.
But yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And that just, we have to make kids sort of more comfortable with complexity, with just sort of like, you know, countering these stereotypes wherever they, so that they're never feeling like, oh, this is what, you know, white men are like, or what black men are like, or whatever, you know, whatever group. Yeah, it's or that.
Well, and it's also about letting them have those conversations as well too,
Yeah.
so that, you know, that they're not feeling surrounded.
Right, and having a more sophisticated conversation around race. Like if I talk about sort of whiteness
Absolutely.
or white supremacy in this way in terms of like social structures, right? Does that mean
Right.
I'm saying like white people, or, you know, so it's just, it's a nuanced discussion that if people don't begin to have it,
Absolutely.
you know, we can never get there. So appreciate that.
Absolutely. No, 100%. No, that's, thank you for adding that. It's important.
Yeah. So we have a question from Washington. Here in Washington, white nationalism is very insidious, especially since we vote so blue. The order was martyred here. We have significant segregation and few people are aware of it. How do I quantify that this is a problem to others? And when I'm speaking to radicalized people, how can I start a dialogue with them so we can talk? That's a big question, but a good one.
I can offer up a starter, and that's that the organization that published the toolkit, the Western State Center, is based in Portland. They do work throughout Oregon, Washington State, Idaho, on inland and down into like the Bay Area. That's generally, I mean, they work nationally, but that's their core. And they do excellent work, and they have people in every part of Washington. I was just at their annual conference in Spokane a couple of weeks ago. I would really encourage that attendee to contact the Western State Center and find out what's going on close to them, because they can support them in starting these conversations, and they can give them a lot of information and also advice on how to have those conversations with all sorts of folks. I mean, I wouldn't suggest walking right up to a Proud Boys rally and starting to talk, because it's getting really heated in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, that seems to be, it's always, somebody mentioned the order. I mean, even since the late 70s, early 80s, it's been, they've had their eye on the Pacific Northwest as kind of carving out their white homeland, so to speak. One, because it's already very white, and two, because they can stay isolated, which, feeds their paranoia in a lot of ways. Find allies. Even though it seems like sometimes we're alone, there are a lot of good people out there, like Nora suggested, Western State Center, and organizations like the Anti-Defamation League do a lot of curriculum development for schools and train law enforcement. There are people out there, so find allies and see what they're doing that you like, and maybe take it to your community as well. But not everybody is an activist. Sometimes it means just teaching, important and tough subjects, and allowing conversation in classrooms. And if it's just being a parent, maybe it just means, listening to your kid and not hearing the words, but kind of hearing the motivations behind the words, because the ideology is secondary. It's nobody wakes up one morning and says, like, I'm going to learn about being a Nazi today, and I'm going to be one. There's always a kind of a path to that I think is an important intervention point.
And Christian, here's a question that I'm sure you get variations on this quite a bit. As someone who practiced hate and white supremacy, do you profit from your anti-racist work? And if so, how do you validate this choice? And I actually want to piggyback another sort of flip side of the coin question, which is, very often, the folks who did one thing and now fight against those things are the big betrayers, right? And you're obviously pushing back against some very dangerous people, many of whom are, prone to a lot of violence. How do you deal with that threat? You mentioned, you have a family, you have kids. How do you?
I wouldn't wish my life on anybody. I can say that. I'd say to my wife all the time, and she agrees, I may be the only person on earth who cannot wait to be out of work, and I'm putting up air quotes. Do I profit off what I do? I make money. I charge for speaking engagements, but probably about 300% has gone into funding intervention work that I do through the nonprofit, and that's been the case for 20 years. I've never drawn a paycheck for this work. I've broken even, and I have an amazing wife, and we have an amazing arrangement, and she supports the work that I do. But yeah, unfortunately, this isn't a lucrative business, nor would that be the reason why I do it. I get threats every day, still, some days more than others, and part of this is because it is my way of trying to repair the harm that I cause, and that's important. It's not just about saying I don't do that anymore. It's about saying I don't do that anymore, and now I really want to make sure that I'm helping the situation so it doesn't exist anymore. And my contribution to that, in some ways, is really just trying to make sure people know the truth, and that people who want to disengage, I can try and help them do that. Because there's a lot of confusion. I can tell you, everybody who's in those movements questions being there, because it doesn't make sense. It can't. It's an illogical ideology, which is, to answer somebody's question, how do you talk to somebody who's in this? Don't debate them, because you cannot win an illogical argument no matter how many facts you use. It has to be emotional. It has to be about building trust and listening and filtering out the ideology to hear about the potholes and maybe trying to fill them in is really the best advice I can give. See the child, not the monster. It doesn't matter if they're 16 or 60. It's always about that internal brokenness.
Nora, when I definitely Melissa will come to you. I think she has a question, but I just want to follow up on this one thing, Christian. So, first, can you share how old your kids are?
Oh, they're 26 and 24 years old. They're not kids
So they're
anymore.
young. But you know, they were. In fact, I think I remember reading that part of the reason you came out of it was because you became a father, right, at a young age, and this isn't what you wanted for your family. But what I'm thinking is, your kids presumably grew up knowing what you had done, knowing your history, and being there when you were starting the right, this sort of flip side of the coin work. And I'm just wondering how you,
Absolutely.
what did that look like, right? Talking to them about that, and what did that look like?
It was difficult because I had to be vulnerable with my children. Like I mentioned earlier, I had to tell them that I was not perfect and that I was broken. Fortunately, they were very young. They were 3 and 1 when I left. They're just almost 4 and 2 when I left that movement. So they were young enough to not have witnessed it, I guess. And I also was very good about never bringing it home. My wife at the time was actually very much against it. But I didn't bring it home because I think inherently I knew it was baggage I didn't want to heavy them with, that I didn't want them to carry. But I tell you what it was is my children were the first things to challenge the sense of identity, community, and purpose that I had adopted at 14 years old and carried for 8 years. Because I had to ask myself, am I a father or am I a hate monger? Am I, is my community the one that I have surrounded myself with to boost my own ego and make me feel strong when I really felt very weak? Or was it the community I'd physically given life to? And, purpose, it was, am I going to go down this road, or am I going to create a future for my children that I'm proud of, that they can be proud of? So it was the first thing that challenged me. And while I didn't make the right decision, right off the bat, because at 23, my wife left, took the kids. I closed a record store where I was selling racist music, and I left the movement. They saved my life because I had that. That was the only thing I knew after I left the movement was my children, how to be a dad. And until I figured out my identity, community, and purpose again, they really, they saved me.
Yeah. Well, that's such a gift to be, in a way, to have to be that vulnerable and show kids that so early, because it's so hard, right, for parents to do that so often.
I didn't know how else to be. I had hit my bottom. I had done the worst things, imaginable. And I didn't know what else to do but to tell the truth, and to kind of, I was already kind of ripped open. It was just kind of, I had to get it out, but I didn't know how to harness that. I didn't know how to use it to repair the harm until I met somebody, years later, around 2000, that really told me that, it wasn't just about saying you're sorry, because that made me feel good, but it didn't make anybody else feel good. It was really about going out there and trying to, repair that damage that I had caused. And been trying to do that for 20 years.
Right. So I want folks to know I put the tip sheet in the chat, and it has lots of links, including to Christian's book and to the Western States Center toolkit that Nora co-authored. So lots of great stuff to learn more about both of them and their work. I wanted to ask about, there's a question about how to stay on top of trends, or if there've been sort of amalgamation of questions. You had mentioned, Nora, earlier a particular video game aimed at young kids. And I'm just wondering, what are the big places right now online that parents, teachers, caregivers should be aware of, if any?
I think you do need to poke around YouTube. There's been a lot of talk, finally, about the YouTube algorithm for suggested videos and just how fast it gets, a 9-year-old who wants to learn how to do something on Minecraft to some really dicey stuff. A policy in our house is that, our younger son is not looking at anything online unless one of us is in the room to just keep an eye on it, or we're passing through constantly. The games, like somebody mentioned, Roblox. Yep, Roblox is a cool game. So is Minecraft. I like Fortnite. I'm a Fortnite fan. It's been great for my older son, to connect with other people. But that's why, like Christian said, that's why they're going there. So if we're looking for like a list of where to check, wherever your kids are, because they know that. And so that, I mean, this brings us back to my first point, which is just always be talking to your kids and always be listening to what they're into. I mean, like Minecraft babble gets old really fast. Keep listening anyway. Like keep asking what games they're playing, what games are your friends playing. You know, just keep listening. No matter how boring and nonsensical it seems sometimes, keep listening.
Right.
Yeah, and we also shouldn't be afraid of those things too, because they're really great tools for young people. What we should be doing is making sure that we instill really amazing values in our young people as far as diversity and inclusion and being able to share their feelings, and critical thinking skills, so that when they see something that may not make sense, they're not afraid to talk about it with you. And so that maybe you're learning about it together, because honestly, they're there first. So what should you be looking for? Nora is exactly correct. You should be looking at your kids, because they're there before we are. I don't want to make it sound like the new stranger danger, but the internet is a vast wilderness. And just like you wouldn't, allow your 10-year-old to, go off for 24 hours into the real wilderness, maybe we should just be paying more attention to that.
Yeah.
One more question. We have lots more questions, but time for one more. And someone who says, I agree that debating logic is never going to work. I hope the answer is to build emotional connection and relationships. The question is, how do you both help youth move past the illogic of logic, or right? So if it's not about logic, how do we instead deal with emotions?
And that's the question for adults too, right? I mean, for all of us, like to reach people, it's the emotions, right?
So I'll say a quick thing, but then I think Christian's the better one to respond to this. I had a student a couple years ago come to me and say that he was becoming really fascinated by this Richard Spencer character. And it would have been so easy for me to clap back on this kid and be like, well, that guy's an idiot and he's terrible and here's why, and why would you be doing that, and oh my gosh, and then refer him to the counselor and so on, which I did, because that's important too. But what I did is just kept listening. Why? What did you like? What sounded good? Where are you? Just like I said earlier with your own kids, just listen, ask questions, stay calm, because sometimes kids are testing like how bad you're going to freak out. And that's true of so many potentially traumatic things. Your kid will kind of float something past you, and if you freak out, they are not going to talk to you anymore. So just keep taking breaths and taking notes and asking questions, and then pause and like, I need to look into this some more, and let's come back to this. That would be the number one trust building thing as a teacher and as a parent that I've learned, is just to keep listening.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about young people, but I would take exactly what Nora said and apply it to 60-year-old children as well. And I treat, when I work with people to help them disengage, I treat them like children, like my own children. I don't beat them. I don't swear at them. I try to set a good example. I don't berate them or throw them out of my house or disown them. I listen to them, and I try to understand what the motivation is for why they're crying. And it's usually not, whatever you think that they're crying about. It's probably a dirty diaper or something like that. And I'm talking about adults here now. But it's really the same approach. They're winning hearts and minds with disinformation. We need to win those same hearts and minds back emotionally, because the way I challenge people is not like directly telling them they're wrong, is by letting them come to the conclusion themselves that they're wrong. That's how I know it works, because they'll just come to this magic conclusion. They won't know how to put it into words, and they'll say, I kind of like that person now that I've met this Jewish person or this or that. It's cognitive dissonance, right? They don't know that. They just know that, oh, this person that I've demonized is suddenly starting to feel human to me. One bit of advice I would say is, and this isn't ideologically speaking, but start in the middle. Start with the things that are shared values, like health, job security, the fact that people love their kids, they want them to have an education and healthcare and access to resources. If we start in there, eventually we'll get off track, depending on the ideology, but we always have kind of a jump back point. if we always start out on the ends of the, the playing field screaming at each other, we'll never find the middle. We might as well just start lining up from each other like in the, American Revolution and take turns firing. I mean, what's the other solution? We have to find a way on those shared values. I think the fact that we're all broken, every single one of us, that's actually the glue that will keep us together.
And I know we're running short on time, but I want to add on to that really quick because someone also put it in the question box, like how does this relate to actually modeling diversity rather than just paying lip service and then having our kids be completely disoriented anyway? Showing them like not letting them be constantly in spaces dominated by white people and or males, straight people, Christians, etc. Show them a genuine appreciation for other spaces instead of just saying diversity is awesome. Like you have to get out there into the world. And I'm saying that again, as someone who's grown up in one of the most segregated cities ever, it takes effort to get out of our comfort zones and get out of what we know and really model that for our children so that when they do find themselves in a diverse environment, they're less vulnerable and they're less unsteady.
This has been an amazing conversation.
I know, you guys really
we
appreciate
really
you doing this work.
appreciate what you've done, what you're doing, what you had to say. We're actually going to take this, I'm going to take this opportunity to do something we almost never do, which is to ask the folks who tuned into this and benefited from what you had to say to support these and other conversations by donating to Embrace Race. I should also say, Christian noted that he doesn't make Nora is a teacher, a high school teacher. Christian, doesn't make any money. I think it's fair to say neither of you is making any money work.
To be funded too.
And to be clear, we're also not paying you, folks. You should know we are not paying Christian and Nora to bring the benefits of their experience to us. And yet, certainly, the work that we do at Embrace Race takes money. And we try to make
platform, right?
And we try to make everything available for free to the people who use the various resources, of which this is just one. So we are asking that you do go to embracerace.org. You'll see a donate button there. And we really want to thank Christian Picciolini, Nora Flanagan, thank you for the work you do. Thanks for spending this time.
And for the reading list you
Thank you for those tats.
Lots of
Those tats are
resources.
crazy.
Love them.
Thank you for this really thoughtful, wonderful advice. Really appreciate it.
Everyone else who's on, remember when it's Tuesday of the month, it's Talking Race and Kids. So we can sign up for our newsletter to know what the next conversation is going to be. Christian?
And I just wanted to end by saying this shouldn't be the end of the conversation. This should just be the beginning of it. So I hope everybody can take maybe something that they've learned here and just take it forward and continue this, because this is really, something we have to change over the general scape of everything.
Got a lot of work to do. Well, we hope to have you guys back on at another point. This is really great. So,
unfortunately, there will be for some time a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we won't be out of work anytime soon.
Much respect and appreciation, you two. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Bye,
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a great night.